October 29th at 3:20 a.m., international defense intelligence networks confirmed a major development. Ukraine reportedly neutralized over $10.8 billion worth of Chinese-made naval systems integrated into Russia's maritime defense grid, achieved through coordinated cyber and electronic warfare operations. It started as faint digital blips in the Black Sea, and then quickly morphed into a full-scale disruption of foreign naval systems. These were systems transferred to Moscow in the past 18 months under Beijing's Maritime Expansion Cooperation Initiative to bolster weakening naval capabilities, and they were taken down remotely and with precision. This incident marks a turning point in Ukraine's assertive technological warfare strategy. In the early hours, analysts noted widespread communication blackouts across Russian naval command centers near Sevastopol, Novorossiysk, and parts of the Caspian Operational Theater. Initially dismissed as routine fluctuations, the disruptions were clearly systemic. In minutes, ships dependent on Chinese-built radar and surveillance modules started losing signal integrity, and whole fleets in key zones were suddenly blind. Sources within Ukraine's defense intelligence reportedly refer to this as Operation Neptune Shadow, a codename linked to earlier cyber campaigns targeting satellite coordination. While unconfirmed officially, cybersecurity think tanks in Warsaw and London have traced digital forensics. They suggest Ukraine used proprietary electromagnetic pulse interference algorithms, a technique designed not to destroy hardware, but to overwrite system firmware, leaving the equipment inoperable without visible damage. By 4:05 a.m., intercepted naval communication logs revealed widespread panic. One verified message described the situation as an invisible assault, total blindness. Another message described how navigation recalibration routines, which rely heavily on China's BeiDou satellite system, had failed. The very integration between Russian vessels and BeiDou, championed by Chinese contractors, became the weakness Ukraine exploited. By infiltrating synchronization protocols, Ukraine apparently induced false geolocation data, causing ships to miscalculate their own coordinates by up to 40 nautical miles. Symbolically, it is enormous. China's naval export systems were marketed as the tip of the spear of strategic dominance, and today that claim lies in ruins. The $10.8 billion of hardware, spanning advanced sonar arrays, AI-assisted targeting, and autonomous defense drones, was reduced to dormant metal. The event highlights Ukraine's growing cyber warfare prowess, and the vulnerabilities inherent in China's military export models in active conflict zones. By 4:40 a.m., Russian naval forces resorted to analog Soviet-era systems in an attempt to restore communications, but they simply couldn't coordinate in real time, and chaos followed. Civilian satellite imagery later showed scattered formations near the Crimean coastline, evidence of disrupted fleet cohesion. While bearing similarities to earlier offensives, like disabling Iranian-supplied drone networks, this operation's scale was vastly greater. The target was not just hardware, but the credibility of the Russia-China alliance. This strike at the technological backbone of Russia's foreign assistance underscores a shift in modern warfare, one defined by digital supremacy rather than brute force. Ukraine's cyber command has clearly evolved into a strategic pillar of its national defense. Around 5 a.m., Chinese media networks went silent on the incident, with analysts observing content suppression across defense channels. Meanwhile, Ukrainian officials released a concise statement via encrypted channels, emphasizing operations were conducted within the scope of defensive countermeasures. For Russia, the consequences were immediate. Naval readiness in the Black Sea dropped to its lowest operational capacity. By 5:30 a.m., European analysts concluded Ukraine had leveraged a hybrid warfare model. The precise timing, coinciding with a major Russian naval exercise, maximized impact. The strategic loss, trust in Chinese technology, may prove far costlier than the raw financial hit. In Beijing, this event is a significant reputational blow to China's global defense export ambitions. Buyers across Asia and the Middle East may now question the resilience of Chinese naval technologies. By 6 a.m., NATO's Eastern Command reportedly updated its maps, marking Russian naval zones as digitally compromised. Analysts described the surgical operation as likely exploiting pre-existing software vulnerabilities embedded deep within the exported Chinese systems. The timing, just before dawn, was also deliberate, coinciding with the rotation of maritime surveillance crews, a window where human oversight is typically lowest. As dawn approached around 6:30 a.m., satellite footage showed multiple Russian vessels drifting, their radar signatures inactive. The once formidable fleet stood paralyzed. By 6:55 a.m., Ukrainian analysts confirmed the operation was complete. The world woke to a new reality, one where Ukraine's mastery of digital warfare had reshaped the perception of technological balance. What began as a battle for territory has evolved into a global demonstration of how asymmetric power can neutralize sophisticated alliances. As the international defense community processed the news, the geopolitical aftershocks began. Between 7 o'clock and 9 a.m., military analysts termed it a digital decapitation strike. The ramifications for China were immediate. State-affiliated media maintained silence, but diplomatic channels reflected unease. Defense observers in nations like India and Vietnam, who use variants of China's systems, reportedly began issuing urgent requests for internal audits. For Russia, the naval communication grid remained fragmented, forcing commanders to use land-based relays. Sevastopol had effectively gone dark, with vessels stranded in neutral waters, unable to recalibrate navigation arrays. Defense experts highlighted a fundamental flaw: the dependency structure between Russian and Chinese military technology. Moscow's rapid integration of Chinese systems to offset sanctions created a lattice of vulnerabilities, including shared digital keys and update protocols dependent on Chinese satellite infrastructure. Intelligence reports suggest the breach began with signals injected into maintenance update packets. Masquerading as diagnostic requests, Ukrainian cyber units likely gained firmware access, deploying an algorithm to rewrite navigation tables. At 8:30 a.m., leaked communications from the Russian Defense Ministry described a total loss of network integrity across all Chinese-linked nodes, warning that the fleet was trapped and unable to restore its systems. Ukrainian officials maintained strategic restraint, acknowledging a significant disruption of hostile surveillance and targeting capabilities without mentioning China by name. This ambiguity preserved deniability while signaling a clear victory. In Beijing, emergency meetings reportedly convened to trace the compromise, with initial findings suggesting a vulnerability from a subcontractor. By 9:15 a.m., defense markets reacted. Stock indices linked to Chinese defense manufacturers showed an immediate decline as investors reassessed China's technological reliability in active combat. Across Europe, a NATO briefing focused on how Ukraine's tactics could redefine defense doctrines, proving that code can be more powerful than conventional artillery. By noon, details emerged that this operation was the culmination of over 6 months of reconnaissance, where analysts mapped the digital signatures of Chinese components and ran simulated attacks. Ukraine has evolved into a strategic innovator. In contrast, Moscow's official statement downplayed the incident as a temporary network malfunction, a claim quickly contradicted by independent satellite data, showing a visible reduction in Russian naval and air patrols. The Chinese government, having invested billions in promoting its defense exports, faced an unprecedented reputational setback. International defense contracts reportedly faced delays, and recipients of Chinese maritime technologies like Pakistan and Egypt began internal system reviews. At 1 p.m., a Ukrainian defense spokesperson reiterated the operation was purely defensive. Global media networks began framing the event as a digital redefinition of warfare, unique for its invisibility. No explosions, yet a catastrophic outcome for the adversary. By 2 p.m., secondary effects surfaced as some Russian coastal command centers, reliant on Chinese communication relays, reported failures in land-based radar arrays, indicating a cascading effect. Meanwhile, morale in Kyiv soared, with Ukrainian technologists celebrated as heroes. At 3 p.m., reports emerged that Russia had reached out to Chinese military technicians for emergency assistance. However, logistical challenges exposed the critical flaw in Russia's over-reliance on foreign defense suppliers, leaving its assets at the mercy of distant partners. By mid-afternoon, the magnitude of Ukraine's success was clear, a massive strategic impact with no lives lost. The Black Sea, once dominated by Russian presence, entered a phase of enforced silence. As the day progressed, analysts began calling it the most significant cyberkinetic event in modern warfare. Inside Russia, naval commanders faced growing scrutiny as Moscow assessed the damage. Satellite imagery confirmed over a dozen key vessels remained non-operational, their control systems locked. Russia's reputation for maritime strength was severely damaged. The official Russian narrative of external interference struggled to hold. For China, the diplomatic tremors were profound. A 5:10 p.m. foreign ministry statement called for all parties to exercise restraint, but carefully avoided acknowledging the compromised systems. Beijing's unease was clear, its narrative of reliability undermined. Across Asia, nations like India and Japan began re-evaluating countermeasures, while in Southeast Asia, the incident validated skepticism of Beijing's military reach. In Western capitals, the event was viewed as a strategic inflection point. NATO intelligence reportedly categorized Ukraine's capabilities as Tier 1 cyber military status. By 6 p.m., a senior US defense official praised Ukraine's exceptional operational sophistication, recognizing its status as a strategic partner, not merely an aid recipient. In London, experts concluded that global maritime security had been redefined, with cyber integrity now more critical than traditional naval tonnage. Ukraine remained composed. President Volodymyr Zelensky, addressing the nation at 6:15 p.m., delivered a symbolic message: "We fight not with power, but with purpose." Domestically, the success ignited optimism, though analysts warned of potential retaliation. By 6:30 p.m., international think tanks began publishing reports on the realignment of cyber deterrence theory, emphasizing how smaller nations can now offset military inferiority through data-driven warfare. The incident also forced introspection within China's defense industry, with calls to reevaluate how export systems are secured. In Moscow, internal fractures widened, with reports of tension between traditional military officers and the tech liaisons who championed Chinese integration. The once vaunted Russia-China defense axis looked fragile. Symbolically, the operation was seen as a validation that intelligence and transparency can expose the limits of authoritarian reliance and overreach. By 6:55 p.m., as the day closed, global analysis agreed on one point: Ukraine had changed the game. The operation was about more than the $10.8 billion in neutralized systems. It was about agency. Ukraine demonstrated that intelligence and resilience could overcome daunting odds. As midnight approached, one truth resonated across the global security landscape. In the age of cyber warfare, dominance no longer depends on the size of the fleet, but on who controls the signal.